Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or still good morning, technically, on the West Coast. In any case, welcome everyone to this Therefore event. This is a highly anticipated topic we're going to be talking about today, which is information security with Therefore. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I see a lot of familiar names, so I know a lot of you know me. But for those of you who don't, my name is Kono. I'm head of digital engagement at Therefore, and I usually do these webinars, at least for the US, for the Americas region. And I'm happy to be bringing you today's. So, what's today's agenda going to be about? Like I said, there's quite a lot of topics we're going to be talking about. To be honest with you, we're probably going to take the full hour until 3 p.m. Eastern. But first, we're going to have just an overview of the security and Therefore. Then we're going to drill into 6 specific topics. And these are access controls, authentication, encryption, backup and recovery, security maintenance, and finally, a word on compliance. So let's go straight into it. I'm just going to quickly touch upon Therefore, because there are most likely a few people who are brand new. Therefore is an information management system, and it is an enterprise grade technology service platform that does a couple of things: classify documents, increase flexibility, automate business processes, and manage strategic information and business documents. The goal of today's webinar is not to specifically go over exactly what Therefore does. We are going to focus on security. But basically, Therefore does 3 main things, and security is a part of all of these: managing information as an asset, running and optimizing business processes, and gathering business analytics. So let's have an overview of security and Therefore. The most important thing I can say, and the main headline of this, is that information security is a core tenet of Therefore software. Security is an essential component of any information management system, really. You're ensuring that confidential and sensitive information is protected from unauthorized access, from modification, from theft. And as we know, this is important because your organization is responsible for vast amounts of data. These can include even personal things like personally identifying information, PII, financial information, proprietary information, which can make it a valuable target for cyber attacks. We know that a breach in security can have severe consequences. These can be legal liabilities, reputational damage, financial losses, fines, all of these. That's why, of course, it is important to implement robust security measures, such as the ones we're going to be talking about today: access controls, encryption, regular security audits, as part of your information management strategy as a whole. Information security, as I said, is of paramount importance to Therefore, to our solutions, to the products that we offer. We're going to go over some of these today, but basically the principal tools that Therefore employs to ensure high security are a few. There's a couple here. The first one is role-based access controls, secure authorization and authentication frameworks, backup and recovery, audit trail and logging, encryption, anti-tamper controls, retention policies, version history, and finally virus scanning. And we're basically going to touch on almost all of these topics, and we're going to get quite in depth into some of them today. I did want to explain the structure of this is that we're looking at both Therefore online and on premises. Why do I make this differentiation? Because the two products, although their end functionality is the same for the user, the security approach is quite different between them. You'll see why as we go through it. Therefore Online is the cloud offering of Therefore. On premises is, of course, a product that you install in your own environment on your own server. Therefore Online is a smart choice for businesses of all sizes that are looking for a scalable cloud solution with powerful information management at a predictable cost. Therefore Online is working through the Microsoft Azure SaaS platform to host the operations and infrastructure. Therefore On-premises is the best solution for uncompromising integration of powerful information management within your own organization's IT stack. As I mentioned, this gets installed within your own IT. Therefore, on-premises is totally customizable from A to Z, and it really puts the full power of Therefore in your hands. Both of these solutions do deliver powerful security tools to safeguard your information, but due to the nature of the deployment type, how you interact with these will depend on what you're using, essentially. As we'll discuss now when we get into the security-related topics, I'll make sure that I mention if and when the approaches to security differ between them, because in some instances, they're the same, and in some instances, they're different, again, based on the architecture and the deployment type. So let's get straight into the security features. These were the agenda points. First thing we're going to look at is access controls and therefore. So just a quick overview. Access controls are a security mechanism used to manage and restrict user access to data and information. This is basically who can access what in the system. They're usually used to enforce the principle of least privilege. This means that users are only granted access to the resources they require in order to perform their job functions and nothing more. Access controls can be implemented at various levels of an information management system, including the operating system, the network, or the different application layers. And within, therefore, they're used at different levels of folders, categories, documents, and all of that. And they can be used to enforce different types of access. So, for example, you can choose read-only access, write access, delete access, or more, depending on what you want each user to be able to do. And access controls basically prevent or help prevent unauthorized access. In this case, they also help with data breaches and other security incidents that could compromise the confidentiality or the integrity of your data and information. So how does this work in therefore? Well, basically the access concept in therefore is called role-based access control. And this is not exclusive to therefore. This is a general concept for access control. And it is a type of access control system that restricts access to information based on a user's role within the organization. Again, it limits users only to the information that they need to perform their job. These are beneficial because they reduce the risk of data breaches. They help ensure that sensitive information is only accessible to the correct roles. With this role-based access control, I'm going to shorten this to RBAC from now on. The permissions are set under role-based attributes, which you can actually see on this little GIF that's playing here. They can be further refined also to set conditions for specific roles. A role is essentially a set of permissions that are logically put together with a given name and a description. So, for example, an administrator, an operator, a reader, and users are then assigned to these roles. So there's no need to configure permissions on an individual level. This really allows you a quite granular, quite fine-tuned control and ease of management, especially in complex security environments. I think it also bears mentioning that RBAC works the same for both therefore online and on premises. It also works the same if you use an authentication framework like a single sign-on to let users access therefore. More on this in a moment. But basically, RBAC is the same in therefore online, therefore on premises. It's the same concept. I did want to mention that a very in-depth explanation of this RBAC concept and therefore is available as part of our e-learning. There is a security-oriented course where we cover roles and permissions and therefore we cover using conditions in permissions, using subcategories, as well as also some specifics about using permissions within workflows, so we can get quite detailed there. This course is available, like I said, in the Therefore e-learning, and it's available to users who have completed the prerequisite basic courses in our e-learning. So it is considered an advanced course. You have to complete the basics first, which unlocks this among other courses. Let's get into authentication now, which is something I mentioned right at the end of the previous section. What is authentication? How is it different from access control? Well, access control is once you're actually in, right? Once you're in, what are you doing? Authentication is actually verifying your identity of a user or device to get into the information management system, or therefore in the first place. This is typically through the use of passwords or multiple factors. Obviously, an authorization framework is important because it's the gate, right, to get to into your system. So this is really the first step, essentially, the authentication. And then once you're in, what you're doing is the access part. The good thing is that access to therefore can be configured using many different authentication methods. These include, for example, internal users and groups. This is the most basic kind. These are users and groups that work only in therefore. Like I said, it's the most basic authentication method. It's secure, works fine, great for smaller systems. However, once you start getting a little bit into a larger system, generally you want to have some sort of single sign-on. There are also several options that therefore supports for single sign-on, in which case you are accessing it therefore with an account from an external service. So this can be like an Active Directory account that you use to log into therefore. And therefore supports, as I said, a bunch. Sorry for the mess on the screen, but we wanted to make sure we fit everything. As I mentioned, Active Directory, Windows local users are supported, LDAP Samba for on-premises only. Then for both on-prem and online, Active Directory Federation services, gold standard basically, integration with several OAuth clients. OAuth clients are also things like Gmail, Facebook, all those little options that you see after it's been authorized, of course. Let me be clear about that. It's also possible to configure authentication using custom JSON Web Tokens. And therefore does offer several pre-built integrations with external user directories, such as Azure Active Directory, Okta, OneLogin, and also OIDC. So OIDC being OpenID Connect. This is supported by therefore, which you can use in general for any authentication system that supports OIDC, which is quite a normal standard for authentication. As I mentioned before, it goes without saying these methods need to be configured by an administrator before they can be used. You can't just take any account that you have, a Gmail account or a Microsoft account, and use that to log into therefore. Clearly not. There are configuration steps that are required. So usually what you'd need to do is create an application and generate credentials on the ID provider. In this case, let's say Azure Active Directory as an example. Again, you would create like an app ID, a client secret, and you put those into therefore to ensure that these connections are valid and authentic. And what this is doing is the two systems are telling each other, we know this connection, we trust this connection. So that's the authentication options that are supported by therefore lots of different ways to do it. Encryption. This was one of the topics that I saw in the poll was the most requested. So we have lots of good information about this. So let's get into it. And there's an easy mode and a more advanced mode. Let's put it that way. First, I want to go over what encryption is just very quickly. Encryption is the process of converting plain text or plain data into a sort of coded language to protect it from unauthorized access or interception. Why is it important? It basically is like locking your data, right? Even if your data is stolen and it's encrypted with a strong cipher, of course, it can protect sensitive data from being compromised. Encryption is used both in transit and at rest. In transit is when data is transmitted across networks or other systems. At rest is when it is sitting on its storage medium. And the most important part is that encrypted data can only be accessed and read by authorized parties who have the decryption key. That's the whole point of encryption. This ensures that your data is kept confidential. So how does this work in therefore? This is where we start noticing a difference between therefore online and therefore on premises. So it is handled differently depending on whether you use therefore online or on-prem. And this is because in the on-prem environment, the customer is choosing the storage media that the therefore server uses. So encryption is really fully up to their discretion. But let's talk about therefore online first. This is the easy mode. If you have therefore online, you don't have to worry about anything. Your data is all encrypted by default. All your information is encrypted at all times using some of the best encryption method that Microsoft Azure offers within their platform, which is where therefore online resides. At rest, that is when your data is sitting in storage. We use Azure Secure Storage Encryption to encrypt the data using 256-bit AES encryption. And in transit, or that is while data is moving across the internet, it's encrypted using HTTPS and SMB 3.0. This would be the case, for example, when you save or retrieve a document. That's what the in transit means here. With therefore on-premises, as I mentioned, it's a little bit different. I mentioned earlier that in this type of environment, the customer gets full control over the storage media that the therefore system is using. After all, you're installing it on your own server. You're choosing where and how the data is stored. This also means that an on-premises customer can choose exactly what level of security and encryption they'd like to enforce on their data. And I mean, there's really kind of endless possibilities here, but two common ways to enforce encryption on a storage medium used by the therefore service would be to use Windows EFS, or encrypting file system, or BitLocker. But I do want to mention something before we move on to the next topic with this. I had, also some discussions with our technical team. Of course, I'm from the marketing team. I'm not an expert on this, but we want to make sure that it's clear that it's understood that encryption is certainly an on-premises. It is a great additional layer of security in your infrastructure if you have an on-premises system. However, it is not necessarily a completely necessary steps if you take enough other necessary security measures. So encryption would protect your data in case someone, for example, a rogue employee or a thief would physically take your hard drives, right, and connect them to another computer and try to read what's on the disks. Encryption would protect you there. If, however, this is something you can protect against also within your network, if you have basically a firewall or some kind of security measure to protect against incoming attacks from the internet, maybe your network is completely isolated, and also this protection from physically taking a disk, it's not completely necessary. So what we've seen is that on-prem customers generally maintain tight control over their servers and their network environment, so encryption isn't always necessary. This is why it's optional for on-premises systems. So it's really up to each customer who's using an on-premises system, their own level of risk acceptance and their own sort of belief in the security of their greater IT infrastructure. But as I mentioned, therefore online uses encryption by default. So like I said, easy mode, nothing to do there. Backup and recovery is the next topic I want to go into. Obviously, having secure backups of critical information and a disaster recovery strategy is a part of any really risk planning activity for any organization that handles documents. This ensures that if you have a hardware failure, a natural disaster, or a cyber attack, you can quickly and efficiently restore data and systems. You can minimize downtime. You maintain business continuity. Of course, it's all part of the grand scheme of getting back on your feet. The good news is that therefore provides native out-of-the-box capabilities for backing up information in the system. All therefore systems, regardless of version or deployment method, doesn't matter even if you're using the most basic therefore version there is, it supports primary and backup storage options. Once these have been configured, the system takes care of moving the documents from primary to backup storage locations. Documents, let me just be clear, the difference with therefore and some other information management systems. Documents are not stored in the database. They are on separately defined storage. We know sometimes that leads to confusion. This is not the case with therefore. This is all done automatically for therefore online users, as you would expect, easy mode. But customers with on-premises deployments can configure storage devices easily, and they can configure highly customizable storage policies that allow administrators to decide exactly which information is stored where. I'm going to get into more detail on that. Let's first talk about therefore online. So with the backup and recovery as it relates to therefore online, as I said, it's easy mode. The therefore online system is designed with a highly redundant, multi-layered backup and recovery system that is managed and controlled by therefore. All of the customer data in therefore online is redundantly backed up in the data center. The data is copied to multiple disks. So even if there is a hardware failure, if one or multiple disks fail, the customer data remains intact. Customer databases are in SQL Azure, Azure SQL, with redundancy systems that are handled by Microsoft's availability policies. All the data in Therefore Online is protected and backed up with LRS, which is locally redundant storage, and GRS, which is globally redundant storage. This is a highly redundant configuration that basically means you have dozens of copies of the system data continuously maintained across different secure storage locations at any given time. GRS, again, globally redundant storage. This means that the data remains protected even in case of a complete regional outage. The data is in a totally separate place, or if there's a disaster, in which case the primary data center is not recoverable for some reason. So LRS, local backup, GRS, backup in literally a different physical location. Like I said, with Therefore Online, you simply don't have to worry about backing up your data. Every scrap of data in your system, whether it's a file, it's an index data, it's configuration information, it's backed up automatically for you. Easy mode. Therefore, on-prem, of course, is going to be a little bit different. You might already suspect by now that this is left up to you. The tools are there, but you do have to take them out of the toolbox. That's part and parcel of what comes with Therefore on-premises. The good news is that configuring your Therefore system to be backed up is super simple. It's all built into Therefore itself, and there's essentially just 3 steps. The first thing you have to do when setting up any on-premises server is to define your storage devices. And by this, I mean literally the physical mediums, the physical hard drive on which Therefore should save your documents. The Therefore system natively supports primary and backup storage, meaning that once you've told the system which drive should be the primary and which one should be the backup, the rest is handled for you. You don't have to take extra steps outside of Therefore to back up your primary storage. You can certainly, for example, if I may get a little more technical now, you can certainly set up a storage location as in a RAID configuration, in which case you are doing that yourself, but you don't have to, because you can configure primary and backup storage within Therefore. The other step now, once you've configured your storage devices, so you're saying, hey, Therefore use this hard drive for primary, use this hard drive for backup. You have to tell the Therefore system how it should move the documents to your storage media. This is when the system admin has to define something called the storage policy, and has to define also which categories or documents are assigned to it. And in the policy, you tell the Therefore server which storage device to use as the primary and backup storage. You are assigning categories to this policy, where all of the categories in that policy will be stored with the rules of that policy. Sounds a little complicated, but in reality, it's just a set of rules to say, this is how I want these documents to be stored. You can define as many policies as you need, which means you can very finely tune which documents are stored where. This really puts the power in your hands. You can get as complex with it as you need to. The last step is to set up a migration schedule, which defines exactly when the documents should be migrated to the primary and backup storage locations that you chose. So again, you're telling Therefore, step 1, use these devices. Step 2, this is how you should save the documents to these devices. And step 3, this is when you should do it. So in reality, it's quite a simple 3-step process that the administrator has to set up. I cannot stress how important this is. It is very important. Therefore does store your documents, even if you don't set this up, of course, but you definitely want to set this up. This is available in every version of Therefore, regardless of what you have. It's really extremely highly recommended to set this up. Otherwise, your documents are stored, yes, by Therefore, but again, not with the primary and backup. So it's really recommended to do this. So that's why we have this important reminder here. You do have to, in on-premises system, ensure that you have this primary and backup storage configured. Again, this is very easy. You just click your new device. You tell Therefore where's the device, and there you go. You have your primary and backup storage set up there. I did want to mention for on-premises, because there is more to do. We have a course about this, again, dedicated course in our e-learning, where you get detailed information specifically about like some of the stuff we talked about here, as well as other information about managing and effectively maintaining an on-premises system. Again, this is a course in our e-learning, so please go ahead and check it out if that's something that's interesting for you. We've covered a lot of therefore features that play a major role in securing your information. I will say that since therefore has been designed from the ground up with security in mind, there are tons of features, settings, and little configuration options everywhere throughout the system to afford our users the highest level of security. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to look at every single button and lever in the system, so we focused on the biggest features, some of the things that we see mentioned the most. But before we reach the final sort of third of this webinar, I want to mention 3 more features in there for that play a significant role in the system's security concept. The first is anti-tamper measures or anti-tamper controls. These therefore ensure that the information is not modified in a way that is beyond allowable parameters. So I want to explain what therefore does with this. Every document that is stored in therefore is electronically signed by therefore immediately after receiving it. I'm not talking about a signature of a person. It is a stamp, a signature of the server, essentially. When a user retrieves a document, the signature is verified by therefore to guarantee that it is the original, that it has not been modified outside of therefore. And even the system administrator cannot change a signed document. The signature is comprised of numerous data points to guarantee the authenticity of the information that you're viewing. And the signature is stored within the proprietary file format that therefore uses, which is called the THEX file. And it's created using a standard signing algorithm, which computes a hash value and then encrypts the hash value with RSA algorithm. What does this mean essentially? If you access a document, like if you do unfortunately everything wrong and you leave your documents exposed on the storage medium, even if a document is touched from there, there's a huge red flag that appears when you try to open that document, warning you that the document has been compromised. So again, it's like an additional sort of like a traceability measure. Even if everything has gone wrong and something has happened to that document, therefore will alert you that it has been changed or compromised in some way. The second thing I wanted to talk about is versioning. I think a lot of you know that therefore has a versioning features that allows you to have different versions of the same document. And what this does is it allows you to track and manage versions, and it allows you to access and restore earlier versions and view changes. And versioning helps to increase security by allowing organizations to track changes that are made to a document over time. It gives you a complete audit trail of all the actions taken by users, and it ensures that only authorized users have access to specific versions of a document. And therefore, you can also keep track of the document history and also case history. It really tells you everything about the actions that were taken on that document. The last thing I wanted to talk about was retention policies. What this is it's a set of guidelines that dictate how long different types of data should be retained and when it should be deleted or archived. And this helps organizations to manage their information not only in a systematic, but also a compliant way. So well-defined retention policies are important because they help organizations ensure that they are complying with regulations, for example, that may say you need to retain certain types of documents for a certain amount of time. They're good for managing storage resources, and they promote good information governance practices in general. Setting up a retention policy and therefore is very easy. Data can be also marked for deletion after a predetermined amount of time. The good thing is that regular users cannot permanently delete documents. Even if they go within therefore and say click delete, it's not really deleted from therefore until an administrator confirms that it can be deleted. And this is a security best practice to ensure that no user, even if they should be trusted, does something that they shouldn't be doing. So even if it disappears from the sort of front end, that doesn't mean it's gone until an administrator confirms that it should be deleted. I'm going to touch a little bit on therefore online. Since I've been talking for a very long time, I'm going to have a quick drink of water. Also going to take a look. Cool. All right, guys, I see you asked a couple of questions. I'm going to get to them at the end. We're almost done. I probably need about 10 more minutes, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions. So why do I want to talk a little bit about Therefore Online more? Essentially, therefore, you are trusting Therefore Online with your documents. With on-premises, you are handling your own stuff. With Therefore Online, you are trusting Therefore to handle your documents correctly. So we feel, in the interest of transparency, that we need to tell you more about security, specifically as it relates to the Therefore Online platform. I will say that we have this stuff extensively documented in a white paper called the Therefore Online white paper, which is available on our partner portal, the Therefore Extranet. But I've included a short summary of the system here and the security measures that are in place. The first thing you should know is that Therefore Online is a globally distributed system, and the facilities that host Therefore Online are located within different regional data centers of Azure throughout the world. As I mentioned, within each region, the data is copied to both data centers to ensure redundancy in case something happens to one of them. Also, I want to say the data stays within the customer's region. It's never transferred to another region. For example, a US-based customer's data would only stay within the 2 US data centers, while a European customer's data would only stay within the 2 European data centers. In the Americas, we have Azure data centers. We have 2 of them in the US. I believe they are Iowa and Virginia. In Canada, also 2 data centers, Toronto, Quebec City. In the rest of the world, we have others as well. I'm not going to get into that because this is our US session, but in any case, you can see based on the flags where the data center pairs are located. So as you can see, Therefore is used all over the, Therefore Online is used all over the world, and it is globally available, globally redundant, and that's why it's part of the security of keeping your information safe and available. I mentioned that Therefore Online services are hosted on Microsoft Azure. The advantage of this is that Therefore Online intrinsically benefits from the very high level security, very high tech security measures that are employed by Microsoft. So Microsoft practices defense in depth protection for physical infrastructure, like literally for their data centers, for their networks, for their data. I don't want to get into too much of Microsoft stuff here. This stuff is also publicly available, documented by Microsoft. This is also covered quite extensively in our white paper if you're interested in that. But the point is that Therefore Online benefits from the additional security layer that is provided by the experts at Microsoft as well. So Therefore Online does run as a virtual system in the Azure environment. And this is a very basic diagram of the system architecture. So it's basically a 3-layer system protected by a firewall, of course. The first layer is called the DMZ, or yes, that means demilitarized zone. It is for front-end web services. These are load balanced for optimum web performance. The second layer is really the application layer, the main thing. This is where the Therefore servers are running. There's 2 virtual machines in a failover cluster, which means that should one of them go down, the other is spun up, which it ensures there's a seamless transition in case something happens. The third layer is the database layer, where we have the SQL Azure databases running, and also the SQL reporting. So this configuration basically emulates a kind of conventional hardware architecture where you would have the DMZ layer as the buffer to the internal segment, which is these 2 guys, which house the virtual machines. This means that these 2 layers are protected from outside access. This is the only layer that is accessible from the outside, and there's actually no data here. It's just a relay. We did want to explain the concept of multi-tenancy as well. So Therefore Online uses the multi-tenancy concept to provide Therefore Online clients with their space on Therefore Online. The tenants are completely separate. A tenant's data is only accessible to the tenant's user, of course. There's absolutely no connection between tenants. Each tenant belongs to the main regional system. So for example, as I mentioned, you are under your regional system. US customers are under the US system. Canadian customers are under the Canadian system. No connection between the tenants, and there is no connection between the data centers, between the regional systems at all. I also did want to mention, sometimes we get asked, there are no subtenants within Therefore Online. There are only main tenants. I mentioned the data encryption already. I'll mention it again for the sake of completeness. System data in Therefore Online is fully encrypted. Like I said, easy mode, nothing for you to do, encrypted both in transit and at rest. I talked about the DMZ layer. It's the only part that can be accessed externally. There's no data stored and it can't be accessed from the outside. So it's a very secure architectural configuration. You're probably not surprised to know that only secure connections are allowed to access Therefore Online. Your standard connection protocol being HTTPS, FTP connections are only through FTPS, and a secure socket, which is used for MFP file transfers. So again, no unencrypted, no unsecure connections are allowed to Therefore Online ever for any reason. I mentioned some of this information about the secure network design. This is mostly Azure stuff. What we do want you to know is that every VM and therefore is protected by a firewall. We also benefit from Azure DDoS protection, which shields against large-scale attacks. And there's also other tools and concepts that have been implemented. Again, I'm not personally an expert on these, but things like network isolation that are used to create boundaries and protect application deployments within Therefore Online. I want to talk about the final part of the webinar now, which is about security maintenance. So let's have a good discussion now about good security practices, about maintaining your Therefore system secure. And I'm also going to even touch on compliance to give a notice to that as well. Security maintenance is an ongoing process, really, to monitor, maintain, update the security measure to include, to ensure that you continue protecting against potential threats. This would be things like installing software updates, patches, you monitor system logs for any unusual activity, you review and update access controls regularly, and any other security measures that would be needed. We know that threats to information security are constantly evolving. Security measures that were effective in the past may need to be updated to account for changes for new threats. Again, you won't be surprised to know that security maintenance involves different activities, depending on whether you use Therefore Online or on premises. And I want to talk about Therefore Online first. Like the previous two topics that we discussed, which were encryption and backup, security maintenance in Therefore Online is mostly handled for you. It's another huge benefit of choosing Therefore Online. There's a few things I want to bring up here as they relate to maintaining high security in the cloud here. The first is that we want you to know that Therefore undergoes regular security audits and penetration tests, which are performed by third-party auditors. Every new version of Therefore is tested before being rolled out to the cloud. And our software development is also aligned with industry-accepted security standards, such as OWASP, NIST, OSSTMM. This is to ensure that our customers can know that Therefore is developed according to these standards, and they can there are security measures that can stand the test of time as they are constantly evolving. Another benefit, Therefore Online, it's always up to date. That is for features, fixes, and security. This means not only that Therefore Online customers have the latest and greatest features, but it also means that the system is always up to date. This means bug fixes, patches, security updates. Threats to security are always changing. As we said, the good thing is that both Therefore Online and the platform, Microsoft Azure, are constantly updated to maintain the highest security standards. Again, the experts are handling this for you with Therefore Online, so there's no need for any action on the customer side. Finally, I want to mention audit trails and logging. This is where some action may be required. This concept applies both to Therefore Online and on premises because the logging works the same for both. Logs and audit trails, as we know, are a pretty important part of maintaining the integrity and security of your Therefore system. They provide a detailed record of system activity. They enable you to detect and investigate any potential security breaches or other issues. This is a core part of what maintains the security in therefore, of allowing you to trace what is happening in the system, and even post incident allows you to see what happened. Therefore has an audit trail feature, which records all the key events. This includes the date of the document creation, modifications, deletion. There's also over 30, I believe it's about 30 different types of events that are logged by the system. Even, things like who logged in, what action they performed, what time it was performed, all of that. And this really keeps a complete record of everything that was performed in the system and makes it easily accessible in case of an audit. And again, this is about maintaining transparency and traceability within your system. Easy mode for therefore online. Flip side for therefore on premises is you've probably noticed the general motif of using therefore on premises is basically like, with great power comes great responsibility. And this applies to security maintenance as well. Again, you have a lot of power, a lot of customization options with everything you can do with therefore on premises. Again, a lot of responsibility as well. I do want to mention that it is the responsibility of the system administrator to maintain the security of the system, but the therefore team is dedicated to helping. Each version of therefore on premises receives regular update packs. Generally, there's 4 to 6 of these throughout the version's life cycle, which is usually about three-ish years, depending. These are regularly released, usually every couple of months. The update packs are not mandatory, but they provide updates and bug fixes that help keep your system secure. And although it does not happen often at all, therefore does also have a procedure in place to release what are called critical hotfixes. In case there is a situation where there is something that needs to be immediately patched. So therefore has a system in place for communicating those. As I said, it happens very rarely, but occasionally those things do happen. So their systems are available to be patched immediately. Of course, therefore online is also patched immediately. That should be clear. We do this because we are really dedicated to maintaining high standards of security across all therefore products. I will say security maintenance is especially important if you're using an on-premises environment. So it's really important to stay on top of it. You should review your network access policies regularly to perform some sort of security audit, make sure that no one is getting in who should no longer be getting in. Sometimes we forget to delete old accounts or change access rights for a person whose role has changed. These things can happen. That's why it's important to regularly review who has access to the therefore system on a regular basis. Clean up unneeded users, review your groups, make sure that your roles are still relevant. As I said, if someone has changed roles, get them out of there, make sure that that's all processed. There's also a great tool to help you with that called therefore workflow that can help you manage that sort of thing. That's not the focus of today's webinar, but it's definitely also a good practice to use therefore workflow as a sort of regular reminder, or for things like when people leave a company as part of the offboarding process to make sure you check their accesses to which systems and things like that. So therefore workflow is a good tool for that too. Let's see, there's also, you also want to check your backup and storage policies. You can do this with a tool called the Therefore Console. You can ensure that your documents are being backed up and stored correctly. Again, the console is a very advanced tool for the system admins, but it's there for that reason, just to check that everything is running smoothly. It's also probably not a bad idea, although it is outside of therefore, to check your physical, to inspect your physical storage media, your servers as needed. Last thing I want to mention is a word on compliance. So obviously no conversation about security would be complete without talking about compliance. It's a scary topic. We know it's a topic that makes a lot of people worried. Not only are there many industry or region specific compliance requirements, but big names like GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA, Sarbanes-Oxley, among others, they make headlines and they cause compliance officers to lose sleep at night, usually if they think about it too much. And it seems like, oftentimes we're hearing about data breaches and information being stolen by hackers. So information security is obviously an enormous part of most compliance standards. And Therefore, goal is to make our information management solution the right tool to help you maintain a high level of information security to remain compliant, regardless of which compliance standard you are adhering to. In general, the therefore products can allow you to achieve compliance by helping manage your information in a traceable and secure way, which is a core tenet of most of these regulations. The tools provided by therefore generally make compliance possible or enable compliance with many of the features that we have talked about so far. And a correct implementation of these tools can help you maintain information confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And again, the big thing that I talked about, the tools for recording and maintaining audit logs. Again, audit logs and traceability are a big part of basically every compliance standards. These are things that therefore can offer that can help you achieve compliance with whichever standard you may be dealing with. I do want to mention a concrete example. I want to point out how therefore meets GDPR requirements, for example. So therefore has passed a rigorous data protection audit by a German consultancy called Ebner Stolz. And they have found that therefore follows the concept of privacy by design, privacy by default, which allows users to meet the requirements of the GDPR in regards to document management. So again, we see that the tools that therefore offers you allow you to meet compliance standards. They do have to be configured correctly, and that should be done in consultation with legal counsel, with IT department, to ensure that the tools are being used in a correct manner to meet the requirements as your company is obliged to. So we've reached the end of the session. I did say it would take about an hour. I'm going to take a look at your questions real quick. I do want to mention there's more information about security in a couple of different places. The Therefore Online Help is a good place to start. Even though there is a lot of information out there, if you're looking for a specific topic, please take a look there. The white paper on Therefore Security definitely goes into more detail about specific scenarios that we couldn't cover today. So that's definitely worth a look. It's also really good for determining least amount of privileges available. I also mentioned we have an e-learning course on security, so definitely check that out. And we also have the Therefore Online white paper, which I mentioned, which goes quite in depth on the security of the Therefore Online platform.